For decades, corporate strategy treated disruption as a rare anomaly, a sudden, massive systemic shockwave that temporarily fractured operations before the market returned to normal. Modern operational reality is defined by a continuous VUCA environment: volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. In this landscape, disruption is the baseline state. The structural shocks of the early 21st century illustrate the shift. The Lehman Brothers collapse sent a severe, contained financial shockwave through specific global sectors. By 2020, disruptions evolved into total systemic halts. Physical societal operations ceased globally, proving that modern crises impact the entirety of the interconnected system. This maps traditional hierarchical crisis management. When threats emerge, alert signals travel upward from the edges, bottlenecking as data converges on a central C-suite node. Isolating sense-making at the top causes decision paralysis. Ambiguous data overwhelms executives, delaying critical instructions. Maintaining velocity during a crisis requires the decentralization of crisis processing. Ambiguity tolerance and decision-making authority must be pushed down to all levels of organizational leadership. The disruption-ready service model provides an engineered framework for this transition. It is designed specifically to protect an organization's human infrastructure from cascading failure during periods of extreme instability. Surviving continuous disruption requires the mathematical distribution of crisis processing. Firms that rely on ad hoc executive heroics maintain a dangerous point of structural vulnerability. A stable organization is powered by high-performance work practices. Under normal conditions, these standardized processes build human capital, increase adaptability, and strengthen baseline employee motivation. This flowchart maps the pathway from standard organizational practices on the left to firm performance on the right. Stable practices shape an employee's perception of fairness, driving commitment and revenue. The top node, disruptive event, illustrates the primary failure point, injecting friction into this pathway. The initial internal effect of an external shock is psychological. Employees must execute their roles in an environment dominated by extreme ambiguity and unchecked uncertainty. In this environment, employee justice perception drops sharply. Uncertainty obscures standard operating procedures, and a lack of transparency lowers an employee's sense of systemic fairness. The flowchart's center reveals the mechanics of this cascading failure. A drop in an employee's perception of justice causes an immediate loss of commitment. This loss of effort degrades external customer service, severing the primary revenue driver and causing the collapse of firm performance. External crises damage revenue by mechanically degrading internal human perceptions of justice and fairness. The facts show that a failure to manage internal perceptions leads to inevitable operational decline. The disruption-ready model introduces diagnosis, recovery, and renewal into the workflow's center to intercept cascading failure. The diagnosis node acts as an early warning system, requiring leaders to identify physiological stress signs before they fracture the service loop, acting as a direct buffering mechanism. Psychological safety is a finite, measurable social resource that rapidly depletes under extreme operational constraints. This line chart visualizes a Harvard T.H. Chan study tracking two trend lines: high burnout rates in standard environments versus stabilized retention in organizations with high psychological safety. The findings show psychological safety mechanically prevented burnout, even when external resources were severely constrained. This social resource acts as a specific protective shield for the most historically vulnerable demographics within the workforce, ensuring critical human capital is maintained during a crisis. Ignoring this diagnostic buffer leads to the rapid, irreversible exhaustion of the organization's human infrastructure. System integrity during a crisis depends on treating psychological safety as a measurable, replenishable, operational input, managed with the same rigor as physical inventory. Once the diagnostic buffer is in place, the organization enters the recovery phase. This phase is engineered to move the workforce out of ambiguity-induced paralysis and restore operational momentum. Recovery requires high-level sense-making and risk-taking capabilities to be decentralized and distributed across all management layers. This bar chart from a Harvard Business Impact Survey shows 74% of organizations prioritize teaching leaders to take risks and provide clarity. Decentralized leaders must execute risks based on imperfect information. Synthesizing data locally prevents team-level decision paralysis caused by top-down delays. The final phase of the model is renewal. This is the structured restoration of the organization-employee trust relationship, repairing the psychological contract damaged by the initial disruption. Renewal relies on informational justice. Highly transparent, frequent communication addresses an employee's baseline need for fairness, even when the news is incomplete. Leaders must aggressively reinforce the overarching organizational purpose during periods of extreme ambiguity to anchor the workforce's focus. Systemic recovery and renewal are achieved by mathematically distributing sense-making, risk assessment, and trust-building capabilities to the very edges of the organization. Internal workforce stabilization establishes the prerequisite for external survival. A clear operational boundary exists between stabilizing the human infrastructure and executing external public relations strategies. This matrix diagrams Situational Crisis Communication Theory, or SCCT. It maps the three crisis clusters, victim, accidental, and intentional, to the specific external response strategies, deny, diminish, or rebuild. Executing a complex external strategy like rebuild requires massive organizational coordination and significant communications bandwidth. An organization cannot successfully execute any of these external SCCT strategies if its internal human capital is burning out and paralyzed by ambiguity. The Complete Disruption Ready model details how organizations operate under continuous VUCA stress. The internal sequence of diagnosis, recovery, and renewal acts as a damper, absorbing incoming shockwaves. This absorption isolates the disruption, protecting customer service and firm performance from the initial impact. Maintaining this internal stability provides corporate leaders the essential capacity and time required to deploy their external SCCT strategies. An engineered disruption-ready workforce reconfigures the mechanical processing of crises. Organizations optimize their ability to absorb shock instead of attempting to prevent unavoidable events. In a continuous VUCA environment, the ultimate competitive advantage is an engineered structural system that turns chaotic crisis processing into a decentralized, sustainable operation.